The rain was coming down in sheets when she found him, a shivering 5-year-old boy, standing alone on a deserted Seattle street. She thought she was saving a helpless child. She had no idea the boy's father was a centuries-old predator, and by taking his hand, she had just sealed her fate. The storm that hit Seattle on the evening of October 14th was biblical. Madeline Hayes, a 28-year-old pediatric nurse at Virginia Mason Hospital, was simply trying to survive the 3-block walk to her bus stop on Spring Street. The wind whipped her umbrella back and forth, and the freezing rain soaked right through her scrubs. It was near the shadowy alcove of an abandoned brick storefront that she saw him. He was incredibly small, perhaps 5 years old, standing completely still in the torrential downpour. He wasn't crying. He wasn't seeking shelter. He wore a strangely antiquated velvet coat, dark navy, and impeccably tailored, which seemed to repel the water rather than absorb it. But what made Madeline drop her umbrella and sprint toward him was his face. It was porcelain white, completely drained of blood, framing eyes that were a deep, unnatural shade of obsidian. "Sweetheart, where are your parents?" Madeline gasped, falling to her knees on the wet pavement and wrapping her own fleece jacket around his small shoulders. The boy didn't flinch. He slowly tilted his head, his dark eyes locking onto her pulse point before drifting up to her face. "I am waiting for my father. He is hunting." The phrasing sent a bizarre chill down Madeline's spine, but the maternal instincts forged by years in the pediatric ward took over. The child was freezing. His skin, when she grabbed his small hand, felt like carved marble left out in a blizzard. "We can't wait out here. You'll catch pneumonia," she told him gently. "My name is Madeline. Let's go to the diner on the corner, get you something warm to drink, and call the police to find your dad." "What's your name?" "Oliver," the boy replied. His voice was too steady, lacking the typical treble of a frightened child. She hurried him into the blinding neon glow of the 5 Point Cafe a few blocks down. The late-night diner was mostly empty, smelling of stale coffee and fried potatoes. Madeline guided Oliver into a cracked red vinyl booth and ordered 2 hot chocolates from Brenda, a weary waitress who gave the strangely dressed, eerily quiet boy a wide berth. When the steaming mugs arrived, Oliver didn't touch his. He simply stared at it. "Aren't you cold, Oliver? Drink up." Madeline encouraged, pulling out her cell phone to dial the non-emergency dispatch line. Before she could press the call button, the diner's overhead fluorescent lights violently flickered. Once. Twice. Then an oppressive, heavy silence descended upon the room. The ambient noise of the grill sizzling and the low hum of the refrigerator completely vanished. The bell above the diner door didn't ring, but the heavy glass door swung open. A man stepped inside, and the very air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was devastatingly handsome, yet terrifying to look at. He wore a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that looked dry, despite the raging storm outside, and he leaned slightly on a silver-tipped cane. His sharp jawline and high cheekbones belonged on a Renaissance statue, but his eyes, a swirling, mesmerizing shade of amber, were predatory. They scanned the room, dismissing the terrified waitress, and immediately locked onto the red booth. "Father," Oliver said, his voice entirely devoid of relief, merely stating a fact. Madeline stood up, her protective instincts flaring, stepping slightly in front of the child. "Excuse me. Are you his father? I was just about to call the authorities. You left a child alone in a storm on Spring Street." The man moved. 1 second he was at the door, and in the blink of an eye he was standing mere inches from her. Madeline stumbled back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She hadn't even seen him walk. "I did not leave him, Miss Hayes," the man said. His voice was a rich, dark velvet that seemed to echo directly inside her mind rather than the diner. "He wandered off. A bad habit of his." Madeline swallowed hard, trembling. How do you know my name? The man offered a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was a smile that promised violence to anyone who crossed him. Alistair Monroe, and I make it my business to know everything about the city I reside in, especially those who touch what belongs to me. He reached out his long, pale fingers, gently brushing the side of Oliver's face. Then Alistair looked back at Madeline. For a fraction of a second, she swore she saw his amber eyes flash crimson, and a terrifying hunger completely paralyzed her. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. She could only stare as Alistair reached into his breast pocket and placed a heavy gold-embossed black card on the table. You have done me a great service tonight, Madeline. I do not forget debts. He placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder. Without another word, father and son turned and walked out into the storm. Madeline lunged forward to watch them leave, but the street was utterly empty. No car, no footprints, just the rain. She looked down at the table. The heavy black card bore only a crest and an address, Monroe Holdings, 1001 4th Avenue. Beneath the card sat a stack of crisp, perfectly uncreased $100 bills. Exactly $10,000. For 2 weeks, Madeline tried to convince herself she had hallucinated the supernatural undertones of that night. The exhaustion of a 12-hour shift, the blinding rain, the adrenaline, it all added up to a trick of the mind. She donated the $10,000 entirely to the hospital's pediatric oncology wing, wanting absolutely nothing to do with Alistair Monroe's debt. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It started subtly. Madeline lived in a modest second-floor walk-up on Belmont Avenue in Capitol Hill. A vase of extremely rare black baccara roses appeared on her fire escape. No note, no card, just the flowers perfectly in bloom, despite the freezing Seattle November. Then the stray dogs in her neighborhood stopped barking whenever she walked by. Instead, they whined and pressed their bellies to the concrete, staring at the empty shadows directly behind her. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday night. Her ex-boyfriend, Derek, had been heavily drinking again. Their breakup 6 months prior had been volatile, ending with a restraining order after he shattered her living room window. That night, Madeline awoke to the sound of heavy drunken pounding on her apartment door. "Maddie, open the door!" Derek slurred violently, rattling the doorknob. "I know you're in there, you ungrateful!" Madeleine scrambled out of bed, grabbing her phone to call 911, her hands shaking violently. "Derek, go away! I'm calling the police!" she screamed through the wood. "I'm gonna break this door down!" Derek roared. She heard him take a few steps back to throw his weight against the frame. Madeleine squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the splintering crash. It never came. Instead, she heard a sound that would haunt her nightmares for years. It wasn't a fight. It was the sound of a large man being abruptly silenced. There was a wet tearing noise, a choked gurgling gasp, and then the heavy thud of something being dragged rapidly down the hallway carpet. Madeline stood frozen for 10 minutes before she finally unlocked the deadbolt and peeked out. The hallway was completely empty. The only evidence that Derek had ever been there was a single, long streak of dark red blood staining the floral wallpaper. When Detective Bradley interviewed her at the precinct the next morning, his face was grim. They had found Derek in an alley behind Pike Place Market. He was alive, but barely. He was in a state of catatonic shock, babbling incoherently about monsters in the walls and eyes made of fire. More disturbingly, the doctors couldn't explain how he had lost nearly 4 pints of blood without any major arterial wounds. The only injuries were 2 deep symmetrical puncture wounds on the side of his neck, which the police officially dismissed as an attack with a specialized ice pick. Madeline knew the truth. She knew exactly who or what had done it. Driven by a mixture of terror and furious determination, she marched downtown the following afternoon. The towering glass monolith of Monroe Holdings on 4th Avenue dominated the skyline. She didn't have an appointment, but the moment she showed the black gold-embossed card to the security desk, the guards immediately stepped aside, their faces paling. She was escorted to a private, secure elevator that only went up. The penthouse office was a cavernous, breathtaking expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Puget Sound. Rain battered against the windows. Standing with his back to her, gazing out at the grey waters, was Alistair. "I told my security team to expect you eventually," Alistair said, not turning around. "Though I admit I expected it sooner. You are far less greedy than most humans, Madeline. Donating the money was a noble, if predictable, gesture." "Did you attack Derek?" Madeline demanded, her voice echoing in the vast room. She refused to let him see her trembling. Alistair slowly turned. Today he wore a dark burgundy shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, making him look less like a corporate titan and more like a lethal lounging predator. "I merely disposed of trash that was threatening my property." "I am not your property," she yelled, stepping forward. "I don't know what you are, mister. Monroe, or what kind of mafia you run, but stay away from me. Stay away from my apartment." Alistair let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated through the floorboards. In a blur of motion, too fast for the human eye to track, he closed the 50-foot gap between them. He stopped inches from her face, his towering frame forcing her to tilt her head back. "You still do not understand, do you, little bird?" Alistair whispered, his amber eyes pinning her in place. The scent of him was intoxicating cedar rain and a metallic copper undertone that made her dizzy. "That night in the rain was not an accident. I have ruled the Pacific Northwest Covens for 400 years. Do you honestly believe a child of my bloodline wanders off?" Madeleine's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" "Oliver is dying," Alistair said, and for the first time, a fracture of genuine raw agony cracked through his icy exterior. "His mother was human, a mistake of my youth. As a Dampier, his human biology is rejecting his immortal blood. His organs are failing." He reached out his cold fingers, gently tracing the line of Madeleine's jaw. She couldn't pull away. She was trapped in his gravitational pull. "We have searched the globe for 3 years for a cure. My alchemists require a very specific, incredibly rare human blood type to synthesize a stabilizing serum. A pure strain of RH null. The golden blood." Alistair leaned in his lips, brushing the shell of her ear. "You are one of less than 50 people on the planet with this blood type, Madeline. I orchestrated the meeting in the rain because I needed to know if your heart was pure enough to care for him. If you had walked past my son that night, I would have taken you by force. But you showed him kindness. So now I am going to make you an offer you cannot refuse. My blood." The words barely escaped Madeleine's lips, her voice a fragile, trembling whisper that seemed to shatter against the heavy, oppressive silence of the penthouse. She stared into Alistair's mesmerizing, terrifying amber eyes, trying desperately to reconcile the impossible reality crashing down around her. Her medical training as a pediatric nurse fought a violent war against the undeniable supernatural presence dominating the room. She knew about RH null blood, of course. It was an anomaly so profoundly rare that hematologists referred to it globally as the golden blood. Because it lacked all antigens in the RH system, it was the universal donor blood for anyone with rare blood types, yet finding a matching donor for someone who possessed it was nearly impossible. "Yes, your blood." Alistair confirmed his tone, dropping into a low velvet timbre that vibrated through the floorboards and resonated deep within her chest. He took a single step back, giving her a fraction of breathing room, though his imposing aura still swallowed the massive office. The human biology within my son is incredibly fragile. It is aggressively rejecting his immortal lineage. His cellular structure is essentially tearing itself apart from the inside out. My chief medical alchemist, Dr. Vincent, discovered that the unique, unblemished properties of your specific blood type can act as a binding agent. It can stabilize his mutation. We have spent an exorbitant fortune, utilized every underworld resource at my vast disposal, and yet, until you kneeled in the rain to wrap your jacket around him, you were nothing but a ghost in our medical registries. Madeline backed away slowly until her spine hit the cold, reinforced glass of the window. The torrential rain of Seattle battered the pain behind her. "You are insane," she stammered, though the terrifying speed he had displayed mere moments ago proved he was anything but a normal man. "You are completely delusional. I am calling the police. I am walking out of this building, and if you try to stop me—" "I will not stop you." Alistair interrupted, his voice, devoid of anger, but heavily laden with a crushing, inescapable sorrow. He walked over to his massive mahogany desk and leaned against it, looking utterly defeated for a fleeting second. "I am a predator, Madeline. I have commanded the shadows of the Pacific Northwest for centuries. I have eradicated entire bloodlines without a second thought. But I am also a father. If you walk out that door, my son will die before the winter solstice. I will not kidnap you. I will not force you into a cage. The serum requires the blood to be given willingly free from the toxic adrenaline of terror. So I am begging you. Name your price, wealth protection, the destruction of your enemies, whatever you desire, it is yours. Just save my boy." The sheer vulnerability in the immortal creature's voice pierced straight through her terror. Madeleine remembered the freezing, unnervingly quiet boy in the velvet coat. She remembered his dark, ancient eyes, and the way his tiny hand had felt like carved marble. As a nurse, she had sworn an oath to preserve life. Could she truly walk away, knowing a child was dying regardless of who or what his father was? "I want absolute transparency." Madeleine demanded, her voice finally steadying, surprising even herself with its newfound steel. "I am not moving into a dungeon. I am not becoming your prisoner. I will provide the blood under my own terms. I will monitor the extraction process myself. And if you or any of your associates ever threaten me or try to control my life, the deal is completely off. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Monroe?" A slow, dangerously captivating smile spread across Alistair's flawless features. It was a look of genuine respect. "We have an agreement, Miss Hayes. Welcome to my world." Within 48 hours, Madeleine's entire existence was uprooted and transplanted into a reality she could scarcely comprehend. She was relocated to Alistair's primary residence, a sprawling, breathtakingly modern, yet gothic fortress, hidden deep within the heavily forested, ultra-exclusive enclave of Medina, right on the edge of Lake Washington. The estate was heavily fortified, surrounded by wrought-iron gates, and patrolled by impossibly swift, silent guards who never seemed to blink. Inside, however, it was a palace of unimaginable luxury, filled with priceless Renaissance art, towering libraries, and a state-of-the-art subterranean medical facility that put Virginia Mason Hospital to shame. It was in this gleaming, sterile lab that she met Dr. Vincent. He was a tall, unnervingly thin vampire with spectacles and a clinical, detached demeanor. Twice a week, Madeleine would sit in a plush leather reclining chair, while Vincent carefully extracted precisely 1 pint of her blood. It was an exhausting process. The immediate aftermath left her incredibly dizzy and lethargic, her body struggling to replenish the rare golden liquid. But the results were miraculously instantaneous. The very first time they administered the synthesized serum to Oliver, the boy's horrifying, sickly pallor faded. A faint, human flush returned to his pale cheeks. For the first time since she had met him, Oliver actually smiled. As the weeks turned into a cold, bitter December, Madeline found herself falling into a strange domestic rhythm within the terrifying estate. She spent hours in Oliver's lavish playroom, reading him classic literature building, elaborate architectural models, and teaching him how to play the piano. The boy who possessed an intellect far beyond his 5 years clung to her presence. She became his anchor to humanity, and inevitably she found herself hopelessly drawn to his father. Alistair was an enigma. By day, he was a ruthless corporate titan, expanding Munro Holdings' immense wealth. By night, he was the undisputed king of the nocturnal world, holding court with terrifying ancient creatures who visited the estate. Yet whenever he looked at Madeline, the glacial hardness in his amber eyes melted into something molten and dangerously intimate. One evening, deep into the night, she found him standing alone in the massive library, staring into the roaring fireplace. She approached quietly, holding a mug of herbal tea, her bare feet making no sound on the Persian rug. "You should be resting," Alistair murmured, without turning around, his preternatural senses detecting her heartbeat the moment she stepped into the wing. "The extraction took a heavy toll on you today. You look pale." "I'm fine," she replied softly, stepping beside him to feel the warmth of the fire. Oliver was painting today. He actually laughed when he got blue paint on his nose. It was a beautiful sound. Alistair closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his sharp jawline. His mother used to laugh like that. Her name was Evelyn. She was human like you, fiercely independent, stubbornly brave. She died giving birth to him. The sheer force of his half-immortal biology completely destroyed her from the inside. I have carried that guilt for 5 agonizing years. He turned his head, his gaze locking onto hers. The agonizing sorrow in his eyes was overwhelming. Without thinking, Madeline reached out her warm human fingers, gently brushing against his cold cheek. Alistair froze. For a creature who had lived for centuries, who commanded absolute authority, he leaned into her touch like a starving man finding sustenance. The physical chemistry between them was explosive, a magnetic pull that crackled in the heavy air. He reached up his hand, covering hers, pressing her palm closer to his skin. But their fragile moment was violently shattered the very next evening. The danger did not come from outside the estate, but from within the coven's inner circle. Cassius, a violently traditionalist vampire, and Alistair's oldest rival arrived unannounced. Cassius despised humanity. He viewed them strictly as cattle, and the idea that the supreme leader of their bloodline was desperately utilizing a human to save a mongrel half-breed disgusted him to his very core. He wanted the throne, and Oliver's death would severely weaken Alistair's mental state, creating the perfect opportunity for a coup. The storm outside was brewing once again, a violent tempest rolling off the Pacific Ocean that mirrored the rising tension inside the Medina estate. Madeline had just finished her bi-weekly blood draw. She was alone in the subterranean medical wing, resting on the leather chair with a slight headache, sipping a glass of iron-rich juice. Dr. Vincent had gone to the upper floors to retrieve a specialized centrifuge component. The heavy steel doors of the laboratory hissed open. Madeline lazily opened her eyes, expecting to see the doctor's familiar spectacled face. Instead, an overpowering stench of rotting copper and ancient dust flooded the sterile room. Cassius stood in the doorway. He was dressed in immaculate modern clothing, but there was nothing modern about his face. It was cruel, sharp, and twisted with unfiltered malice. His eyes were completely black, devoid of the amber warmth that Alistair possessed. "So this is the precious little blood bag that has our mighty king completely distracted." Cassius sneered, his voice, a horrifying, raspy hiss that made the hairs on the back of Madeline's neck stand on end. He moved with that same horrifying glitch-like speed, instantly appearing right beside the refrigerated storage unit where her extracted blood was kept. "Who are you? You shouldn't be down here," Madeline said, her voice shaking, despite her desperate attempt to sound authoritative. She slowly slid her feet off the recliner, her hand instinctively reaching for a heavy steel surgical tray nearby. "I am the inevitable correction to Alistair's pathetic weakness," Cassius replied darkly. He reached into his coat and produced a small silver vial filled with a glowing, corrosive green liquid. "A supreme predator does not bow to a mortal. A king does not mourn a half-breed abomination. Once I destroy this serum, the boy will finally succumb to his flawed nature, and Alistair will be broken." Cassius raised his hand to smash the vial into the refrigeration unit. "No!" Madeline screamed. Without a single thought for her own safety, driven entirely by the fierce maternal love she had developed for Oliver, she launched herself across the room. She swung the heavy steel tray with every ounce of strength in her tired body, slamming it directly into Cassius's wrist. The silver vial shattered on the sterile floor, the acid burning violently through the linoleum tiles. Cassius let out a deafening demonic roar of fury. He backhanded Madeline with terrifying force. The blow sent her flying across the laboratory. She crashed brutally into a glass partition, the reinforced material spider-webbing under the devastating impact. Madeline collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. A sharp, blinding agony exploding in her ribs. Warm, thick blood immediately began to pour from a deep gash on her forehead, blinding her left eye. "Stupid, fragile livestock," Cassius hissed, stalking toward her. He crouched down, his fangs fully extending, dripping with venom. "If I cannot destroy the stored blood, I will simply drain the source completely dry." He lunged for her throat. Suddenly, the massive steel doors of the laboratory were completely ripped off their reinforced hinges, hurtling through the air and smashing into the medical equipment. The very foundation of the mansion violently shook. Alistair stood in the ruined doorway. He was no longer the composed corporate king, nor the grieving father. He was the apex predator of nightmares. His eyes were blazing, terrifyingly luminous pools of crimson fire. The shadows in the room seemed to physically stretch and bend toward him, bending to his apocalyptic wrath. "Cassius." Alistair's voice wasn't spoken. It was a guttural, demonic vibration that shattered the remaining glass in the room. Cassius barely had time to turn his head. In a blur of sheer, unadulterated violence, Alistair crossed the room. He slammed Cassius against the concrete wall with enough force to crack the foundation. Madeline watched through her blurred, blood-filled vision as a terrifying battle of immortals unfolded. It was brutal and impossibly fast, but Alistair's fury was absolute. With a sickening, resonant crack, Alistair tore Cassius's head clean off his shoulders, ending the traitorous threat in a fountain of dark, ancient ash. Alistair immediately dropped the remains and rushed to Madeline's side. The crimson fire in his eyes vanished, replaced by sheer, unfiltered panic. He gathered her broken, bleeding body into his arms. "Madeline, stay with me. Look at me." He pleaded, his hands desperately pressing against the wound on her head. "Vincent, get down here now." The doctor rushed into the ruined lab moments later, taking one look at the destruction and immediately checking Madeline's vitals. His face went ghostly pale. "Sire, she is hemorrhaging internally. The blunt force trauma shattered her ribs, puncturing her lung. She has already given a pint of blood today. Her body is going into severe, hypervolemic shock. She won't survive conventional surgery." At that exact moment, the emergency alarms in the adjacent pediatric recovery room began to blare, a deafening, high-pitched warning. Oliver's heart monitor was flatlining. The stress of the battle upstairs had triggered a catastrophic cellular rejection. "The boy is arresting," Vincent shouted over the alarm. He needs the stabilized serum now, but the centrifuge was destroyed in the fight. Madeline coughed a terrifying spray of blood staining her lips. She looked up at Alistair, whose face was a mask of absolute agony, forced to choose between the woman he was undeniably falling in love with and his dying son. "Do it!" Madeline gasped, her hand weakly gripping the lapel of his ruined shirt. "Give it to him directly. Connect us." "No." Alistair firmly refused, his voice cracking with emotion. "A direct transfusion without the serum buffer. It will permanently alter you. The immortal venom in my system will mix with your blood. You will not be fully human anymore." "I don't care," she whispered fiercely, tears mixing with the blood on her face. "Save our boy, Alistair. Bite me." Alistair looked into her fading eyes, recognizing the undeniable truth. It was the only way. With a heartbroken sob, he laid her gently next to Oliver's bed. He bit deep into his own wrist, letting his immortal venom-laced blood flow, and pressed it forcefully against Oliver's pale lips. Then, with agonizing tenderness, he leaned down over Madeline. His fangs pierced the soft skin of her neck, right over her thrumming pulse point. The pain was a blinding, brilliant explosion of white-hot fire, quickly replaced by a wave of pure, absolute euphoria. She felt the ancient, terrifyingly powerful, immortal energy flood her dying veins, knitting her shattered bones back together, sealing the lacerations. Her heart stopped beating for one agonizing, endless second before roaring back to life with an aggressive, thunderous new rhythm. When Madeline finally opened her eyes, hours later, the storm outside had broken. Soft, golden morning light filtered through the heavy velvet curtains. She was lying in the massive master bed. Oliver was curled securely against her side, his breathing steady, his cheeks flushed with perfect health. The boy was cured. Sitting in the chair beside them, holding her hand with a grip that promised he would never, ever let go, was Alistair. The terrifying vampire king looked completely exhausted, yet his eyes shone with a profound, eternal adoration. Madeline squeezed his hand, feeling the new immortal strength coursing through her body. She was no longer just a pediatric nurse. She was the queen of the Pacific Northwest, bound by blood love, and a darkness she had finally learned to embrace. If Madeline and Alistair's dark, thrilling journey completely captured your heart, do not let the story end right here. Hit that like button, share this video with fellow romance and paranormal fans, and please subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking dramatic tales. Your support helps us bring more gripping, real-life, inspired stories from the shadows to the light. Drop a comment below on what twist shocked you the absolute most.